The history of documentary photography began in the 1850s, around the time of the Civil War. Three notable photographers, Mathew Brady, Alexander Gardner, and Timothy O'Sullivan, photographed the gory battles of the Civil War. The idea to photograph the war was Brady's, and with it the title of documentary photography was born.
Mathew Brady, in addition to his own work, employed a team of assistants who fanned out across the country to capture the war. Together they produced more than 10,000 images of the conflict and brought the gruesome realities of warfare to the American public.
The early practitioners of documentary photography, including acclaimed figures such as Mathew Brady, had no choice but to set up the subject matter that fell within their photographic frame. Long exposure times meant that Brady and the photographers who worked for him could not capture combatants in action during the Civil War, and he had to be content with taking pictures of their floated remains on the battlefield. In the aftermath of the 1863 Battle of Gettysburg, photographer Alexander Gardner ordered that one of the fallen bodies be dragged 40 yards and propped in a rocky corner. The resulting image, Rebel Sharpshooter in Devil's Den, continues to command attention despite the recent discovery of the photographer's manipulation.
As time grew, so did the fascination of documentary photography. By the beginning of the 20th century, still photography was becoming the visual language of communication. At this time, documentary photography focused on industry and urban settings, and often photographers used it as a tool for social reform. Jacob Riis was a police reporter for the New York Tribune newspaper. In the early 1880s, he put forth an investigative report of the city's Lower East Side 5-point slums. With the help of the invention of magnesium flash powder, he was able to photograph the darkness of the living conditions in the slums. He released a book in 1890 called How the Other Half Lives, which contained all his photography. The scenes he published shocked the upper class who normally ignored the situation. He soon became known as one of the city's most important social reformers. One of the most influential photographers who helped develop documentary photography in the 20th century was Louis Hine. He was known for his documentation of child workers. He used his photography as an attempt to support child labor laws. He also felt strongly about the abuse of children as workers that he quit his teaching job and became an investigative photographer for the National Child Labor Committee. Hine traveled around the country photographing the working conditions of children in all types of industries. He photographed children in coal mines, in meat packing houses, textile mills, and canneries. He also took pictures of children working in the streets as shoe shiners, newsboys, and hawkers. In many instances, he tricked his way into factories to take the pictures that factory managers did not want the public to see.
After the Civil War, the use of documentary photography made its way further towards the West. It began to be used more for showing the living aspects of Americans. Beginning under the support of the Resettlement Administration in 1935, and then the Farm Security Administration in 1937, a group of about 20 men and women worked under the supervision of Roy E. Stryker to create a pictorial record of the impact of the Great Depression on the nation, primarily the rural areas in America. This project was perhaps the greatest collective effort in the history of photography to mobilize resources to create a cumulative picture of a place and time. Many of the 80,000 photographs taken by the FSA photographers were distributed by the agency to newspapers and magazines to build support for the rural programs of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal.
In the late 1950s and early 60s, American photographers reinvented the documentary tradition. The goal was to have aesthetic photographs that astonished the public. That is when color photography came in the 1960s, when Kodak and Agfa introduced color negative film to the market. A great innovator in color documentary photography is William Eggleston, who in the mid-60s had virtually abandoned black and white photography. Eggleston's motives came from different places in the Mississippi Delta. One of his most famous photos is Greenwood, Mississippi, also known as Red Ceiling. Taken in 1973, it features a naked light bulb and a few pipes in front of a background comprised of a red ceiling of a room. Stephen Sasson, as an engineer at Eastman Kodak, invented and built the first electronic camera using a charge-coupled device image sensor in 1975.
Since the late 1990s, an increased interest in documentary photography and its long-term perspective can be observed.
In the mid to late 1990s, digital cameras became common among consumers. By the mid-2000s, digital cameras had largely replaced film cameras, and cell phones had integrated digital camera. By the beginning of 2010, almost all smartphones had integrated digital cameras.
A camera allows you to close into communities and situations and take a look. It also allows you to step back, reflect, and comment. The distribution of contemporary documentary photography now relies on a number of contexts and is spread between magazines, books, and art galleries. Documentary photography will continue to show us the living conditions of people around the world, but with technology, it will also develop in artistic ways. Photographs will always tell stories that are worth 1,000